What happens in modern day is people get up and have coffee. That is the number one worst thing you can do for your brain in the morning. If you drink the coffee, you've just dehydrated the brain even more. You should have slept through the night. That night's sleep should give you what you need. Our brain has cortisol, dopamine, norepinephrine, all those things happening. And what happens in modern day is people get up and have coffee. That is the number one worst thing you can do for your brain in the morning. Because in the morning, you should not need coffee. You should have slept through the night. You should have had a great night's sleep. And that night's sleep we'll talk about in a minute, but that night's sleep should give you what you need. Now, if you have coffee 2 hours later, that's fine. But we have something called the cortisol curve. And if you wake up in the morning and you crush that curve by drinking coffee, your brain is inherently lazy. If you're gonna do that for you, if you drink the coffee biologically, which food is good, the number one thing I tell people about brain fitness is you cannot think a bad diet. So, in eating ketone diet, one that's rich in ketones is good for the brain. So when you think about what most people do is they feed their brain all the wrong foods in the morning. They think they're eating well by having a banana, or something like that, a high carbohydrate. And that carbohydrates actually locks your brain out of ketones because there's two phases to digestion. The first phase is to digest everything and metabolize it. After that 4 hours, your body is making ketones. So the longer you can go without any solid food, the more you're feeding your brain. You're not feeding your brain when you feed it right away, unless you're eating a really good clean diet. So Let's go back to the morning. So we wake up in the morning, we get up in the morning, we're getting the light from the sun. We have more receptor sites in our eyes for mitochondria use. And mitochondria is actually, when we measure mitochondria, we're actually measuring how much light energy does the mitochondria bring into the cell and how much does it transmit it. Now this shows up as ATP. So if you think about ATP, if you get the right, even back 10,000 years ago in the ancient traditions of India, they did what they called helos therapy. And what they do is if you had a mental disorder 10,000 years ago, they would tell you to get outside 2 hours before sunrise. Now, how did they know 2 hours before sunrise, our sun puts more infrared light on the planet than any other time? So that basically they were being biohackers 10,000 years ago. Now we can take equipment and do it any time of the day we want. But back then you had to get up at that time. So our body has this high cortisol. Now at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're out there hunting and gathering. Now, when we're hunting and gathering, we're not working all day long in front of screens. We're not sitting on our butts. In fact, the new thing is, 20 minutes of setting is equivalent to having a cigarette. What they're saying is when you sit down, your body is supposed to be resting. Now we're working against it because we're stressing it out. Maybe somebody has coffee all day long. Or stimulating it with tea or sugar or whatever. Well, the biological system has to do what it does while you're doing what you're doing. So if you don't ever give it a break, but what would happen is if we were hunting and gathering, we would take time. Maybe we'd go by the river or we'd sit on a mountain. We would stop and pause and basically smell the roses. We might be glad we're alive, but we're in a whole different place. Now, what Tom Brady says, and he's one of our users, he says that for every 1 minute of exertion, you need 2 minutes of recovery. Most people don't do that. They actually go work out, and then they go from working out right to their car, right to their job. If you really want to get BDNF going, and that's neuroplasticity in the brain when you exercise, take 5 to 10 minutes. I actually wrote an article about this in Muscle Magazine, because if you take that time, you will bind muscle at the mind-muscle connection. Acetylcholine it's almost like you're blood doping, but you have the world's greatest pharmacy in your head. If you go right from one stressful event to another stressful event, the brain doesn't have the time to do the work it needs. We need to have recovery after we work out. You don't just go from work. That's why and also when you're working out, so many people take it way too seriously. It should be fun. It should be enjoyable. If you're stressed out or you're trying to push yourself this is not going to be good for you. You need to take your time. You need to breathe in between, reset your body. Now, we did this naturally. Imagine these bodies were designed for the Serengeti. The Serengeti at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, nothing's going on. There's no lions chasing zebras. There's no activity. It's too hot. So we are the biological descendants of all these generations. In fact, epigenetics says the 7 generations, but I just read something that said they've now tracked it back to 250 generations are influencing you. So it's not just you. It's not just what's going on. Now, the Hopi Indians said 7 generations were influencing them. So how did they know that? How do all these ancient traditions, now we're taking modern technology and we're showing how this is all true. Neuroscience is now proving, it sounds almost like a religion rather than it is a science, because we're proving out all the things they thought about in these ancient traditions. In the middle of the afternoon, your temperature is going to drop 2 degrees at 2 o'clock, wherever you're at around the world. And this happens not because you want it to happen, not because you ate poorly, not because you did anything. It happens because the sun and the circadian rhythm, that sun out there, think of it as the mitochondria for our solar system. It's beaming codes to us. No matter where you're at around the world, your temperature is going to drop 2 degrees. That's why people run for tea time or coffee or whatever. What your body really wants is a nap. Now, most people don't have 4 hours. So what we've done with our technology, BrainTap, is we can condense what you would get in 4 hours in 20 minutes. By using light, sound, and vibration. We took technology to do it because we don't have time to do it any other way. And the nice thing is then you liberate your nervous system. What we found is that it can reclaim the energy you lost in the morning. So you get 2 mornings. It's on a TED Talk right now with Julia Ard, who is our researcher. She went to Google and Microsoft, and they asked me in 2020, how can we prevent burnout? Because all these people had to go back to the office in 2021 and they were working from home in their pajamas, and now they get back into the pressure cooker. They want to quit. They're going to burn out. I said, what you can do is have them do a BrainTap session at 2:00 in the afternoon. Oh, we can't do that. That takes up too much time. We can't just pause for 20 minutes. I said, tell you what, give me 2 weeks and I guarantee you will never stop doing it. We could measure their work production. The average worker got 26% more work done if they took that 20-minute break. Because when your mind's fresher and you basically reclaim the day, and then what happens is toward the end of the evening, you should also crash. That cortisol curve should crash if you're not doing a lot of caffeine and other things to stimulate it. But if some people don't realize caffeine will stay in your system 6 to 8 hours. So some people, if they drink a cup of coffee at 2:00, they still can't sleep at night because it's not long enough for them. But if you do the right, and we could talk about sleep programming and whatever, but I always joke with the biohackers when I'm especially talking to Dave Asprey's, I'll say, I'll challenge any one of you. I'll do whatever I want up to bedtime. I'm going to do my BrainTap. I'm going to beat your score, because we have to get you to delta as fast as possible. Most people don't understand sleep. It's not about going into bed and going to sleep. That's probably the worst thing you can do for your nervous system. You do more neurological work while you're sleeping than when you're awake. But what we have to do is unwind our nervous system. If you're the type of person that hits the pillow and doesn't remember anything, but then wakes up in the middle of the night, that's because it's like you have this to-do list and your brain's still thinking about it, but you said, no, I'm going to go to sleep. But in the middle of the night, when you go through one of the sleep cycles and you get back up into maybe an alpha state, now you're going to pop back out into beta. Fear, frustration, and anxiety is going to wake you up because that's what's supposed to happen in the morning. But because you have this big to-do list that you didn't deal with, it's going to happen. So what we do is we recommend doing like a 4-8 breath before you go to bed. And really unwind your body. Even if you don't have BrainTap, if you started doing breathing into the count of 4, breathing out to the count of 8, and then when you breathe in, you're going to think about what's going on in your day. Don't try to solve the problems, just think about them. But then as you breathe out, think about all the things you're grateful for, the things that were good about the day, positive events, because we know in science that if you're an optimistic thinker, you're going to live 6.5 years more than a negative thinker. That's already been proven in science. That's when you're talking about mindset. If you look at life as a challenge rather than a threat, your body is going to upgrade to the highest level epigenetics. And this is something your listeners might not know. Back in 2003, they mapped the human genome. Everybody knows that. But they only mapped 1% of it. Could you imagine graduating from school and you only answered 1% of the final test and they said, you did it? No. But in 2018, we finally have technology that tells us that 99% of junk, it actually changes every 40 seconds. You change every 40 seconds based on everything. Your epigenetics, you have mirror neurons in every cell, not just your brain. You have more mitochondria in your brain than anywhere else, but every cell is a thinking brain. So it's always evaluating your environment. And it's either upgrading your epigenetics, you show up as your best self because you look at life as a challenge, or it's downgrading it because you look at it as a pessimist. And that pessimist, your brain will always prove you right. So if you think you can or you think you can't, when Henry Ford said that, he was actually talking about epigenetics. If you think you can, your body will rise to the occasion and you'll do it. And if so that's what's kind of with ancient technology. This used to just be by default, whatever you thought you were. Now we can hack it, right? We can start doing things like mindfulness, meditation, relaxation, BrainTap, cold plunges, eating healthy, changing our diet, not listening to the advertisers who are just out to make a buck, but listen to people that are looking to make us healthy. There's a big difference.
Yeah, no, I totally resonate with everything you're saying there. I feel like it sounds kind of woo-woo when you hear it for the first time, but I've just been diving deeper and deeper into this, and it's very true, very evident that the people that just have all this negativity, this aura of pessimism about them at all times. Like they are more sick. They've got more chronic illness and fatigue. Like they just like it's manifesting into physiological symptoms that are non-deniable. Whereas like I never get sick, and I think a large part of that is because I believe I never get sick, and like I think so much of it is tied to the energy and the mindset. And I 100% agree with what you're saying. We're about to roll up our sleeves and get super deep here. So if we're looking at a perfect day
Mhm.
and how to map that out, so I do not wake up and eat a banana or anything like that, but I
Right.
am guilty of drinking coffee.
Right.
And that's mostly impairing my natural cortisol fluctuations in the morning hours, correct?
Right. You want to get up and have a large glass of water with some Celtic salt. Think of your body as a battery that needs to be charged. Your brain actually shrunk 3/4 of an inch when you were sleeping. If you drink the coffee, you've just dehydrated the brain even more. So now you're fighting against your physiology. Now, like I said, 2 hours later, have your coffee. Have it after your workout. Because if you can work out in the morning, they've actually proven that 10 minutes in the morning is worth 20 minutes in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Because now there should not be as much circulating sugar in the bloodstream. It's in your muscles. And if you can clear out the sugar that's in your muscles, your body will become a more efficient fat burning machine rather than a fat storage machine. If you've already eaten and your blood sugar is high and your muscles are full of sugar, your body's got to turn on that insulin pump and you become a fat storage machine because your insulin is a fat storage hormone. And that's why if you can fast in the morning, at least for an hour or two even, it's going to make a big difference. That means getting up a little bit earlier. Most people sleep way too much. They think they need 8 hours of sleep. And the reality is we only need 6.5 hours. Every study shows that. We need 1 hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM sleep. And we'll beat any score, like any Whoop score or Aura or anything like that.
Okay, I definitely want to talk about sleep. When it comes to, I train fasted, so no worries there. What about decaf coffee? Like, is that there's a little negligible amount of caffeine in decaf, but would that suffice?
Well, yeah, you're not going to have the same effect as the caffeine's going to have on the system. But
Okay,
still, think in terms of what does your body need to do to process through the body?
right.
If just the taste, what I recommend people do is herbal teas are a better solution. Like peppermint tea is a natural stimulant, but it's also a blood purifier. So
Okay.
you can do that and put some honey in it or something like that, or maple syrup, which doesn't affect your blood sugar because you want to keep your blood sugar at fat burning, especially in the morning.
Right. And then you mentioned taking a moment, 5 to 10 minutes post training
Mhm.
to relax. And that's going to do what from a physiological standpoint?
Well, when you work out, the reason that we have such big brains is we started doing more physical work. We started balancing on our legs instead of on all fours. This creates something called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. Now, what that does in the brain, even if you're not meditating, it's going to do it anyway. That's going to bring energy to the brain. So with that energy in the brain, you're going to have neuroplasticity. Now, what's going to happen is if the brain doesn't have to do anything new, different, or novel, it's going to hold on to that and going to start training the brain to respond to what you just did. So if you're working out, you want to have better gains in your workout, you take the 5 to 10 minutes afterwards and you visualize what you just did. And what happens is you reinforce those neurons that are firing together and wiring together, and it disassociates any of the other ones. So even if you have to stop your workout 5 minutes early, I would stop and maybe do the box breath, which is a very simple one. You just breathe into the count of 4, hold at the count of 4, breathe out to the count of 4, hold it out to the count of 4, and do that for 3 to 5 minutes. You're going to find that not only are you going to reset your nervous system, because when you worked out, you stressed out your system. So
Hmm.
now you're going to calm it down. Now you get that quiet focus and you get that inner power that lets you handle because it's going to be stressful. Life's stressful and it's not always going to give us what we want. But those people that are adaptable and flexible are going to find that they make it through the day easily. So the secret here is when we work, remember, if you work out, now I'm talking about when we talk about 1 minute of exertion, 2 minutes of recovery, that includes your sleep. So if you're not sleeping well, you're not getting recovery. So you can't if you worked out for an hour, let's say you're not going to do 2 hours of, visualization. That would be, but that's going to go into your sleep cycle and help you.
So perfect scenario would be like sit in the sauna
Yeah.
post training. You get the heat shock proteins, then
Oh,
you could
yes.
just focus on breath work, and then don't take your phone in there and just be scrolling through social as you're
Right.
doing that.
Right. Just put on some classical music, put on your brain tap, whatever it's going to be. I do that every morning. I have a sauna. And of course, if I do my cold plunge, I'm going to go in my cold plunge and I'm going to go in my sauna. If you came to my clinic, I have 6,000 square foot, all the research stuff you'd ever want to play with here. And we do a lot of training, and we measure the nervous system to show you what happens. When somebody just works out and goes and doesn't do anything else, the body stays in a state of sympathetic drive for hours, which means you're burning the candle at both ends. But if you take a minute, just to take a minute to, it's almost like when some people have to cry to get out of a certain state, or the laughter will get you to break a state. You have to break that state so the body knows, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm now recovering. And that's where it comes in. And doing it in a sauna is a great way to do it. In fact, if you have a cold plunge, they found that if you do the cold plunge first, do your workout, and then do this sauna, you actually increased your testosterone about 3 times.
Yeah. No, I do try and do the cold plunge prior to the training. Plus,
That's
I mean, if you're doing a cold plunge first thing upon waking, you don't need coffee and the caffeine to wake you up. It kind of works.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Savage Clip. If you want to see the full blown deep dive, check out the full episode here, and I'll see you there.